Today we're going to be talking about a halacha called toifel. Toifel comes from the same language we use by brachas, ikr v'tofel. You have a bracha like you might have a peanut chew. So what bracha do you make? You make an adama, you make a shakal, what do you make? So it depends. There are rules of what's referred to as ikr, the primary, and tofel, the secondary, right? So something is tofel. It's similar to the concept of batal. Batal meaning it's help me out with a good English word for batal. It's canceled, nullified, thank you. Yeah. Right? It's nullified, but it's not exactly the same. Tofel means you have two things in some capacity. One is the primary, the one is the secondary, that we allow the secondary one to exist, even though on its own it's problematic, but as long as it's considered subservient to the primary unit, and I'm speaking in generics here because it applies in many different areas of halacha. Our Gemara is going to talk about it as it pertains to karbanos. Now, another second thing we came off from yesterday's Gemara was that we talked about a concept that whenever you have a carbon, that a carbon is an obligatory carbon, it's a carbon chova. The halacha is that the animal that you use must be an unconsecrated animal, meaning it has to be purchased with regular money, similar to the way you cannot use your tzmeiser to be yotze your mitzvahs matanas levyonim, because you've already designated this money for one stucca. You can't now take it and knock off two birds with one stone. Same thing over here. You can't double dip and take mos meiser sheni, which you've redeemed from, let's say, your produce in your field that you're bringing to Yerushalayim to eat there. You cannot then go take that already consecrated money, purchase an animal for a carbon, if the carbon is a chova, if it's obligatory. Now, if that carbon is a voluntary carbon, what we refer to in halacha as a carbon nedava or a carbon neder, where you're not obligated to give it, but it's rather something that one is choosing to give, well then, since what you're doing is only a reshus, it's only optional, we don't view that as a chova. That's not called double dipping. That's called dipping once. Yeah? Okay. So that backdrop, we now are going to discuss the Mishnah. The Mishnah had said three things. We said, buy an ola, carbon ola, the olas re'iyah. Everyone has a chiyuv to bring a re'iyah on yantiv, and therefore it's a chova, and therefore it must be purchased with chulin. It must be purchased with cash. You got to go in your pocket, your money, and buy it. And everyone agreed by the shlomim that you would use for your chiyuv simcha, where you don't have an actual chiyuv every day to bring a carbon. In fact, if you have meat from other karbanos throughout the week, however you manage to get your hands on it, you could be yotze your mitzvah simcha with that meat. Therefore, the bringing up of those karbanos are not considered chiyuvim. They're only, they're considered optional. You don't need those karbanos. You can get it through some other way. The Mishnah then discussed, though, what's the halacha by the shalmei chagiga? The carbon chagiga, on the one hand, is a chova, and so you would think it should be no different than the ola. But it said in the Mishnah that it's a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says what we would have said, which is that must come from chulin because it's a chova, whereas Beis Hillel, for some reason, said it can come from meiser sheni. Now that would be a problem. Why? Because meiser sheni, we said, cannot be used for any carbon that is a chova, and the carbon chagiga, the chagosa mosu chag l'Hashem, is a chova. So how can one use mos meiser sheni for his chagiga according to Beis Shammai, according to Beis Hillel? What's that?
Okay.
Yeah.
The extra meat is done.
We're not up to that yet. Okay. Yeah, I'm laying the foundation for the Gemara. So now we're holding in the Gemara, second line on Daf Ches Amud Aleph. Omar Mar. We're quoting the Mishnah that I just said. Beis Hillel oimrim min ha'maaser, that you can take your carbon chagiga and you can use what? You can use meiser sheni. You can take the money that you redeem from your produce, pour up to Yerushalayim to eat, which is already holy. What's the problem?
Oh, he's in.
He's in. Aaron's in. Yeah. I think he was bothered we didn't start already. So.
I don't think he has video. Can you see it? He said he has no video. All right.
Oh, maybe now. Yeah, we go. Okay. Can you see us now? Okay, wonderful. So Beis Hillel says that a carbon chagiga, which is an obligation, he says, despite the fact that it's an obligation, you can use meiser sheni. That flies in the face of everything we just said. You need to only use chulin for an obligatory carbon. Ask the Gemara. My question, Amai. Chagiga is a chova, chagos mochzu chag l'Hashem. So how can Beis Hillel say over here that you can use meiser sheni? Fantastic kasha. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula, one answer, bitofel. One word answer, bitofel. What I just said earlier, bitofel meaning you can expand the money that you're allowed to use to purchase your chagiga by making sure that a portion of the chagiga is purchased with proper money, chulin money, and the additional can be used with meiser sheni. Now, the way I just explained it was inherently vague because there's two potential ways one can understand this idea of tofel, of combining good money and bad money, so to speak, meiser sheni with chulin. How? And Rabbi Yochanan are going to have a machlokas. I'm going to say it outside because the words of the Gemara don't really help. So let me say it outside. There's two ways to look at this. let's understand a situation where, for whatever reason, I want to bring a second Chagiga. Right? Our Gemara is going to understand that one can bring a second Chagiga on the first day of Yontif, and the reason why one might do that is because maybe he has a big family, and the first Chagiga, the first animal is going to have enough to eat, so he wants to make sure everyone can eat from, so therefore he gets a second animal. So now, each one of these animals are a Chagiga. Right, so the idea that the Chagiga has to be one animal, let's banish that idea. You can have a Chagiga that is 2 animals, 3 animals, 5 animals, depending on how big your family is. As well, we haven't discussed this until now, but the Turi Evan says what he says is a Davar Pashut, and he brings it from the Tosefta, that the Re'iyah and the Chagiga, although there are, he says, although we all have a Chiyuv to bring one, just like by a carbon Pesach, we don't all have to bring our own. We can all do it b'shutfis. He says a chagiga and a re'iyah can be done that way as well. In fact, he brings a raya from the fact that the shiur of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel is so small. Are you telling me that one small piece of silver, which if you go through the currency lists of the potential currencies, we're talking about something that might be today the equivalent of $15-20, maybe less than that. So how could it be that you can buy an entire animal with that amount of money? So he uses it to answer other questions in other places, but he's basically pointing out that you can have a scenario where, let's say, we all decided to come together and buy a chagiga, and we're all going to be yotzei our mitzvah. As long as each one of us puts in 2 pieces of silver, according to Beis Hillel, that's the minimum shiur, we're yotzei our mitzvah chagiga with 1 animal. But what if, let's say, we all want to come together and we're going to buy 2 animals? Those are both obligatory korbanos. So the Gemara says like this. Let's say I want to bring that second animal, right? So how do I split? And let's say we all have money. Let's say it's $1,000 to buy both animals. And collectively, we have $600 of chulin and $400 of ma'aser sheni. So, do I have to buy a $600 animal that's only chulin, and then I can use the ma'aser sheni for the second animal? Or do I have to make sure that each animal has a little bit of some chulin in it?
Well, the ikr is the first one.
Okay, so you sound like one opinion. Yes.
Or both.
Meaning, right, okay. So it's complicated, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, so I'm just going to keep it simple. Chizkiah, the first opinion, he's of the opinion that more important is that the first animal be entirely devoid of any ma'aser sheni. Entirely devoid of any ma'aser sheni, even if it means the second animal will be entirely ma'aser sheni. Right? So he said, now, of course, it would be better to have some chulin in the second animal, but you cannot have the first animal with anything less than 100% bought with chulin money. Right? Whereas Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, no, my primary concern is that you don't have any chagiga ever being brought up that doesn't have some chulin in it. So he doesn't care so much about whether the animal's entirely chulin. It just has to have some chulin. Now, again, there's logic on both sides. Just going to speak it out. There's logic on Chizkiah's side because, like Binyamin's saying, really the primary chiyuv is the first animal. The second one is really only helping us being able to eat. So you can make the argument that the only one here that's a chova is the first one, which case that one must come from chulin. The second one can come from ma'aser sheni because really that almost falls in the same category as a voluntary korban to a certain extent. The logic in Rabbi Yochanan is well, if you tell me that the minimum shiur of a carbon for chagiga is 2 pieces of silver, then really all I really need to do is make sure that those 2 pieces of silver are chulin. Everything beyond those 2 pieces of silver is just me buying a nicer esrog. So who says that has to come from chulin? So they both have justification. Some achronim, Rav Yosef Engel says this, that the difference between the two opinions is they're arguing in kamos and eichos, in quantity and quality. Meaning, what's more important, that I have one carbon that's perfect, the first one, that's chizkiah, or do I want to have many karbanos that are good? You see, a little bit of a difference, but there's many different formulations of the machlokas over here. For our purposes, I think we're good. So again, so chizkiah says, first animal has to be completely chulin, the other one could be completely meiser. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no, every carbon has to have some chulin in it. I don't care if they're not fully chulin, they have to have some chulin. Okay, let's read it inside. Amar Ula, he says betofel, and Ula doesn't explain what that means. Chizkiah Amar toflin behema lebehema, meaning that means you can combine animals, meaning one animal completely chulin, one animal completely meiser. Ve'ein toflin mos lemos, but you can't combine money into one animal. One animal cannot have, meaning the first animal can't be combined. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no. Toflin mos lemos, you can do that. Not only can you do that, you must do that. You cannot have any animal that is entirely meiser sheni. Ve'ein toflin behema lebehema, you can't have one animal that's entirely meiser sheni. Of course, it would be best if you could have both animals meiser of chulin. Not everyone would agree, right? But if you're going to have to start cutting some corners, they're arguing over where you cut the corner. Again, Chizkiah says you cut the corner by making the second animal have Meiser Sheni, first one has none, and Rabbi Yochanan says you cut the corner by making sure that although every one of them has some Meiser Sheni, they cannot have anyone that is entirely Meiser Sheni. The Gemara is going to bring a brisa to support one, a brisa to support the other. Tanya Kavas de Chizkiah, Tanya Kavas de Rabbi Yochanan. Tanya Kavas de Rabbi Yochanan, again, the one who holds that every carbon must have some chulin in it, and you cannot have a carbon that is entirely Meiser Sheni. And here the pasuk is referring to a pasuk in talking about the yontiv of Shavuos, and in that pasuk it says, "V'asisa chag Shavuos laHashem Elokecha." You shall make chag Shavuos for Hashem, and the language of the pasuk is misas, which is a word that really no one would really know what it means. Well, Gemara is going to get to that. Misas nidvas yodcha asher titain kasher yivarecha Hashem Elokecha. And the way we'll understand it is that misas, I'll give you a little bit of a foreshadowing. The Gemara is going to understand the word misas to mean chulin. It means that the money that's used to purchase your shvuas karbanos, let's say chagiga, whatever it is, must be from chulin. Misas means chulin. And nidvas yodcha asher titain kasher yivarecha Hashem Elokecha is saying that how much chulin can you use? Whatever Hashem blessed you with. If you want to use something in addition to that, you can. That's how the Gemara is going to try to explain this. We'll see, read it inside. Tanya Kavos de Rabbi Yochanan, Misas, which is Melamed She'adam Mevi Chavos Min HaChulin. That part everyone agrees that you're supposed to use Chulin for your carbon Chagiga. And here the Bryce says this is the line that's going to be a support to Rabbi Yochanan. Uminayin She'im Rotza La'arev Ma'arev. The language of Eruv means to mix. Now that would really only sit well if we're talking about money. You can mix, you throw a bunch of coins in a jar, you can't tell which coin went from my left hand, which one came from my right hand. That's a true mixture. But you can't tell me that cow and that cow is a mixture. There's two separate cows. Even after I bring them together, they're not mixed. So if the fact that the Bryce is asking the question is that, how do I know that although you're supposed to use chulin, if you want to mix, you can mix? Clearly, that must be talking about ma'os l'ma'os. You're mixing up money, which would be a right of Rabbi Yochanan, that really we want you to be able to mix up money of chulin and meiser sheni, but not mixing up animal and animal. Talmud. Now, where do we learn that that's true? Talmud. The Bryce says, "Kasher yivarecha Hashem Elokecha," meaning to say, like I said earlier, that how much chulin must you use? Whatever Hashem blessed you with. That's how much you use. Anything above that, meiser sheni, no problem. But it's within the animal itself that you must have at least something chulin, no matter which animal you're bringing up. That's the raya for Reb Yochanan. Tanya Kavaz the Chizkiah, the opposite, that the first animal has to be entirely chulin, the second animal can be a mixture or can even be entirely meiser sheni. Misas, he agrees, melamed she'adam mevi chavoso min chulin, that your carbon chagiga must come from chulin. However, the Brisa continues and says something differently. Beishamai oimrim, and this is relevant for our Mishnah, right? No, this is the Brisa. The Brisa to support Chizkiah is going to come now. The Beishamai oimrim is part of that Brisa.
Really?
Yeah, Beishamai oimrim. Beishamai says,
Chizkiah? No.
Chizkiah is the Amora who says the tofel means the first animal has to be entirely chulin, and the second animal can be whatever. The Tanya the Kavase is going to be what we're about to read. It's a longer brisa. The brisa says as follows: Misas melamed she'adam mevi chavoso min chulin. The pasuk by Shavuos where it says it's got to come from chulin, so your chagiga has to be from chulin, not from meiser sheni. Fine. Beishamai oimer. Beishamai says Yom Rishon min chulin. He says this requirement is only on the first day of Yontif. Mikan ve'elach min meiser. You can use it on all of the other days.
I don't get it.
It's a brisa. That's a problem.
But the Bryce is telling you for Chizkiah, Gemara.
No, Tanya Kavasi de Chizkiah. I'm bringing a Brysa to support Chizkiah.
This is not.
Yeah, the Brysa is starting with the word Misas. Yeah,
we brought two Brysas. One to support.
Yeah, he's got it. I think he put the comma in the wrong spot. Yeah, I understand. Misas melamed she'adam mevi chavoso min chulin. That's the first statement, which again, no one argues with that. That statement is everyone agreeing. Yeah. And Beishamai oimrim yom rishon min chulin. Yeah. Okay. The Shammai says the first day of Yontif, meaning to say, no matter how many chagigas you bring on the first day of Yontif, the first day. This is important. The first day, first day, all day, however many chagigas you bring, everything comes from chulin, which is the Beis Shammai l'shitas in our Mishnah. What did Beis Shammai say? That the chagiga must come from chulin, and it's the mashmos would be no matter how many chagigas you bring, mikan ve'elach, but on the second day of Yontif, assuming you've already brought your chagiga on the first, then you can use meiser. Why? Because everything you're doing at that point is just additional. That's not obligatory. That's completely a rishus, and therefore you don't have to bring a chova. What does Beis Hillel say? Beis Hillel, he limits it even further, or expands it. Sorry. Beis Hillel omrim achila rishona min achulin. What must be from chulin? Only the first carbon. Mamish chizkia. Mikan ve'elach min ha'meiser, meaning even the second carbon on the first day can have meiser sheni in it. So that right there is the raya to chizkia, right? Because he's proving that even the first animal can't have any meiser sheni, but from that point in on, it can. Now again, you don't see a raya from, well, you do. You do see a raya from here that the limit to where meiser sheni goes is only from the second animal and on. So you see both sides of chizkia. The point is, I have a brisa, the first brisa for Rabbi Yochanan, and second brisa for chizkia. Now the brisa just happens to continue and talk about something else. V'shar kol yemos haPesach. Here, the Rishonim go back and forth. What is this actually referring to? Is this referring to Chagiga, or is this referring to Simcha? So Rashi here and many Rishonim explain it to be talking about your Shalmei Simcha, your mitzvah Simchas Yontiv. V'shar kol yemos haPesach adam yoti yedei chovaso. Which chovas simcha? Rashi explains the maser behema. What's maser behema? Maser behema is a halacha that the person has to bring the 10th. He marks the 10th animal with some red paint, and that animal has to be brought up as a special carbon. It's a carbon shlamim.
He's doubled that, like he said, yes.
So maser behema we're seeing over here. So if you understand the Gemara here is just bringing maser behema to be talking about shalmei simcha, then this has nothing to do with tofel. This is just a separate halacha, which is that if a person wants to, he can use meiser sheni to bring his meiser behema, because meiser behema is not a chova in this, meaning it's a chova once you have the 10th animal, but there's no chov to have animals to go have a 10th animal. So since it's not obligatory, you can use meiser sheni.
Meiser behema is stricter than meiser sheni. It seems from this
to a certain extent. Yeah, there's a kol shekan one can make.
Are we talking about Meiser Behema, Meiser Sheni?
We're talking, well, in the Gemara, we're talking about Meiser Sheni. The Gemara, we're talking about Meiser Sheni. The brisa that we're using to support Chizkia mentions, Hagavorche, unrelated, mentions that for your carbon simcha, if you want to bring a carbon simcha, that carbon simcha, the rest of the days of Yontif, you do not have to use chulin, you can use Meiser Sheni. The support's really coming more from the statement of Beis Hillel. When Beis Hillel says that it's achila rishona, that it has to be from chulin, meaning can't have any meiser sheni, right? Yeah. That's referring to the very first achila on the first day, meaning the second achila can already have meiser sheni, but not the first, which again implies that the two animals, the first one has to be completely chulin, and the second one can have a mixture.
So wait, so there's 3 stages. The strictest, you have to use chulin. The second stage, you can use meiser sheni. And the third stage, which is even lower for the simcha, you can even use maser behema.
So what you just said, while true, it's a discussion in the Rishonim. Can you use meiser behema even for shalmei chagiga? That's a discussion.
Right,
meaning
right.
Once we're saying,
I'm saying there's 3 stages in the brisa.
Yes,
when the brisa says meiser, it means meiser sheni. But when the brisa says meiser behema, it's shifting. So it's
where are we saying that you can use meiser behema for?
So again, to keep it simple, you can use your meiser behema, that animal that you've already consecrated for your carbon. You can take that animal and use it for your shalmei simcha. You can use that to be mekayim your mitzvah simchas yontiv. Now again, if you think about it, it sounds crazy. It's really not so crazy. Why? It's in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you could be yotzi or simcha with a slew of animals. You could be doing the Nadarim and a Dovas and Meiser Behema. It says it right there. This is not a chiddush. We know this already. Yeah. That's how Rashi explains it. Other Rishonim say that no, this is a chiddush, huge chiddush. It's talking about your Chagiga, and it's saying you can even use Meiser Behema for your Chagiga, which is a tremendous chiddush. Until now, all we'd be saying is you can use Meiser Sheni for your Chagiga, which is just money. Here we're saying you can actually take a consecrated animal, truly double dip it, and use it for your Chagiga, which is a tremendous chiddush. Rashi does not say that. Rashi says it's talking.
That's the last line. I see.
The Kanbeilach doesn't work the exact shot, right?
What's that?
That's right.
Right. Mekan Beilach, we're understanding, and it's the simplest way to understand it, and I think it's the correct way to understand it. Only talking about Shalmei Chagiga, and it's talking about only Meiser Sheni. Okay, so I have 2 brises. One supports Chizkia, one supports Rabbi Yochanan. Wonderful. Okay, the last line of this brisa says, Adam Yotzi Dechavas B'Meiser Behema, asked the Gemara, B'Yom Tov my time alone. 1 second. The read in this brisa at the end of it there was that Shar Kol Yemos HaPesach, Adam Yotzi Dechavas. Why can't I take my Meiser Behema and be Yotzi my Chi of Simcha, the way Rashi understands it, on the first day? I have a Chi of Simcha on the first day. Why can't I bring that up? So he says, very simple. What do you mean? I'm Ravashi. Dilma Asi La Asure. We're nervous you're going to actually do the Meiser, meaning separate the animal on Yontif. What's the problem with that? Why mishum sakarta? Because the way they used to do it is they would take the 10th animal and paint it red, and that's considered dying tzeveya on Yontif, which doesn't have a heter of achol nefesh, and therefore it's going to be usher. So therefore one can't do that. But einachanami, once the rest of the Yontif comes along, you can use it. Okay, now the Gemara just quickly says, we had assumed as we were reading both of the braises supporting Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan that the word misas in the pasuk by Shavuos means chulin, and the Gemara, no one argued with that. Asked the Gemara, "My mashma the high misas lishon de chulin." Where do we get that? Lashon dechsiv. Pasuk says, "V'yasam hamelech Achashverosh mas al haaretz." He put taxes. So now the pashtus in the read in the pasuk is that what's a tax? If I'm taxing you, it means the money that you're using to pay the tax comes from chulin. Although it's not so clear, because what are we trying to learn from here? We're trying to learn that just like Achashverosh taxed you, that is called a mas, and therefore misas has to be
From yourself.
But that's not true. The mas itself is an obligation. The king is making it an obligation, and we're using that to say that therefore when we do misas, it's not an obligation. What? That doesn't make sense. So there's different ways the Meforshim explain it. One of them says that they bring a very interesting shot in the Achashverosh that really, although the Gemara says that Achashverosh made everyone poor, it wasn't through raising taxes. The Psukim are mashma that he lowered the taxes. And what happened was that he was very convincing in convincing people to spend their own money. So the taxes were lowered, and ironically, the revenue for the government went up because people felt they trusted the government. They were lowering taxes. I trust the government. I want to give more. And Yana Diyama, no joke.
I wonder why they went to Megillas Esther. You have in Shemos Sorry Misim. You have this.
Oh, so that's another discussion. And over there, it's significantly more simple. Because there it's clearly talking about not chiyuv. Either way, Yisrael Yotzi Dei Chavasim in the Dharma and Dov. Let's go back to the Mishnah.
It's not about chiyuv. It's about chulin versus chulin is the word the Gemara uses. It doesn't say optional. It says chulin. So maybe that will help answer it.
Yeah. That could be.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's true. Not touch him in any way.
Fair point.
Especially his.
That's true. So it said in the Mishnah that you could be yotzi that you're chi of simcha with all of these other karbanos. Tana Rabbanon, the Brisa says, "V'samachta b'chagecha." You have to be yotze. You have mitzvah simcha b'chag on Yantiv. The rabbis call minei smachos l'simcha. What we're saying over here that it includes many different forms of simcha, meaning that many different animals. It doesn't just have to be the shalmei simcha that you bring. It could be the other animals that we saw. The Brisa is really just reflecting the din of the Mishnah. Mikan amru chachamim. Yisrael yotzi de chavasan. You can be yotzi your chi of simcha b'nedarim and nedavos meiser behema. That's listed in the Mishnah. The kohanim can also add on the meat that they eat from a chatos ve'osham ubechar, which is entirely for them. Uvechazav v'shok, which is from all of the shlamim that we bring. The chazav v'shok is the part that goes to the kohen. Yachol af b'ovas and menachas. I might think you could even do ovas and menachas like it said in the Mishnah. You can't do birds. You can't do meal offerings. No carbs and no poultry. Yeah. Talmud lomar v'samachta b'chagecha. Pasuk says samachta b'chagecha, meaning I need both of them. Mi shechagiga ba mehem. You can only use an animal for simcha that can also go for a chagiga. Yatsu elu she'en chagiga ba mehem. Ofos, there's no chagiga, and meal offerings are not chagiga. Now, how do I know that they're not chagiga? Rashi tells me the chagiga chelev ksiv ba. Since the chagiga, the pasuk says the lashon of chelev, right? It says lo yolin chelev chagi, right? So chelev is only applicable to animals that are what we would call like regular animals, non-poultry, and obviously there's no chelev in flour. Therefore, a chagiga, a shalmi, the mitzvah simcha can only come from those types of animals. So the shita, the first shita of the Gemara, seems coming from a brisa, is that it comes from v'samachta b'chagecha. I need both parts of the pasuk. V'samachta b'chagecha, because whatever a chagiga is good, I could do for my simcha. Rav Ashi Amar no, v'samachta nafka. He says the word v'samachta itself teaches me to exclude poultry, and Rashi explains why. We'll say in a second. Yatsu elu she'ein bahem simcha. Why do bird offerings and carb offerings not have any simcha? So the Rishonim speak out. It doesn't mean they have no simcha. They don't have a lot of simcha. I like dark meat chicken. It's pretty good, but it's not the same thing as a piece of good piece of steak. The pizza's nice, but it's not the same thing as a piece of steak. Okay.
So one of my uncles would only eat beef on Yontif, but do most of us do that? Is that?
So that's a major discussion in the poskim. The Rambam brings that Simchas Yontif. The Rambam brings Simchas Yontif. Even nowadays, it's bebasar v'yayin. The Gemara says it's b'yayin, and the Rambam seems to. No one knows where he gets it from.
Well, basar v'yayin, but is it basar?
So that's
well, that's another issue.
The Shulchan Aruch. Listen.
Beef.
Shulchan Aruch says. Shulchan Aruch says no.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Shulchan Aruch says doesn't bring meat. Shulchan Aruch specifically leaves out meat. That nowadays Simchas Yontiv is b'yayin. Beis Yosef, yeah, and he in the Beis Yosef he's bothered by the Rambam, where the Rambam get that nowadays meat is besimcha.
This is the same. I don't know if it's the same minion in Shabbos also.
So Shabbos is slightly different because oneg is a little bit different.
I'm focusing on Yontif.
Yeah. So with simcha, and then there's another Gemara that the Gemara talks about. Ksus, you buy your wife this. So there's different shittas in the Rishon. There's a famous Shagas Aryeh who says nowadays simcha is really not noyeg the same way it was, and really what it is nowadays is anything that makes you basically happy on Yontif.
In Europe, they were lucky if they had a little poultry every Shabbos, much less beef, which was very expensive.
Which maybe influenced maybe why they said certain things. Right. And then the other thing that's discussed in Simchas Yontif is also, some people say, some Rishonim talk, is a Rashba who holds that you need to have bread by Simchas Yontif, for Simchas Yontif. Meaning Shabbos, you have to have Lechem Mishnah by each Suda for its own reason. But do you need to have Lechem Mishnah? Do you even need to have Lechem? Do you even need to have Pas on Yontif? Can you have a Yontif meal without bread? That's another discussion. It's not here in the Gemara, but it's mashma from the Gemara here that you're not Yotzei Simcha with Pas. And some Rishonim want to conclude from here that therefore you have no requirement to wash and bench and a Sudas Yontif. You can have a Chinese dish. You have a little fillet, you have a little, beef, broccoli and beef, and you're Yotzi your Chi of Simcha on Yontif.
You have no requirement al Simcha, but you might have a requirement al Suda. It's two different things.
Could be.
In other words, to make it a Kviyas.
Could be. It's not clear where the Chi of Suda on Yontif comes from. Meaning, does the Suda have to be a Suda of Pas? Right. The only place where you see there's an Mefurish Chi for Pas is Sukkot and Pesach first nights. You have a Chi of Matzah and you have a Chi of sitting eating a Kazayas Pas in the and that really is just a Kviyas Suda of the Sukkah. Right. Yeah.
If Chazal say Ein Simcha El Basar V'Yayin, how could we discard that?
So Chazal is not saying Ein Simcha El Basar V'Yayin. Chazal says Ein Simcha El Basar. Chazal say Ein Simcha El Basar, and it means Basar carbon. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed,
so it never applied.
Right. Now the Gemara does say that nowadays yayin is to be used, but each Rishon has a different formulation of how they go through. Let's go to the Mishnah. We'll get back to Tofel here. Yatzu elu she'ein behem simcha. Rav Ashi hai b'chagecha mayav. Meaning, Rav Ashi learns this entire halacha comes from v'samachta, and those things that are misameach, you can be yotze your chiyuv with. But those that are not besimcha, meaning the ola and the mincha, you can't be. So he doesn't need b'chagecha to teach me what the Stamma de Shas understood it as. He says, "Ahu, look at the Rav Daniel Barkatina, the Rav Daniel Barkatina Merav, minayin shein nosim noshim imod." The Gemara we learned in my Kot Nafes. Shenemar v'samachta b'chagecha v'loy b'ishtecha b'chagecha v'loy b'ishtecha, meaning that you can't aim arvin simcha b'simcha. You don't get married on Yontif. Okay, very nice. I mean, there's many discuss over here. How is Rav Ashi arguing on a brisa? The brisa seems to be saying Talmud loymer v'samachta b'chagecha, and then Misha Chagiga b'amehem yotze elu she'ein Chagiga b'amehem. He seems to be arguing on a brisa,
but only on a source, not on a halacha. So
right.
maybe it's different.
So some want to say that
he had a different gear.
Yachol af ba'ofos v'nochas Talmud loymer v'samachta b'chagecha. That the next line, Misha Chagiga b'amehem, is an amayim. The Stamma de Shas coming and explaining the pasuk. Rav Ashi will say no. V'samachta b'chagecha. The brisa is to be understood as from v'samachta.
Oh yeah.
That's how maybe you could read it.
The brisa may end after.
Yeah, that's
the
how they
doesn't always explain all the details. I agree.
That's a tricky way to get it. Don't get me wrong.
The fact that we don't have quotation marks causes a lot of rage.
Yeah,
a lot of rage.
It's funny that's a good way to say it. Yeah. Okay. We're picking up from the Mishnah, Chesam and Beis.
And that's why, by the way, we say Ad Kan Lashono in like the Rishonim. It's like a quotation.
Yeah.
End quote.
It's like when someone's dictating, right. So pasuk.
Unquote. Yeah.
Okay. Mishnah. We took a little break from Tofel. We're coming back to Tofel now. What did we learn earlier? We learned earlier that one can bring more than one Chagiga on the first day, and every one of them is called a Chagiga. Says the Mishnah, Mishi yesh la'ochlim merubim. Let's say a person has a big family. But unfortunately, he does not have a lot of money. So what is he supposed to do? He has a lot of responsibilities on Yontif. He's got a big family, doesn't have a lot of money, and you have a chiyuv to bring an olas re'iyah, and you have a chiyuv to bring a carbon chagiga. So maybe shlamim merubim. He has to bring many shlamim to feed his entire family, because remember, shlamim are eaten, olas are not. Olos muatos, don't spend a lot of money on your olos. They're anyways going to be completely burnt up. So if you have to apportion your money, do it in such a way where you're spending more of whatever little resources you have on the shlamim and less on the olos. However, nechasim berubim, if someone has a lot of money, the ochlim muatim, and Nebuch doesn't have a big family, right? So he's only him and his wife and maybe one child, or maybe just him and his wife, and he has a chiyuv to bring an olah, and he has a chiyuv to bring a shlamim, then maybe olos merubas. He should try to, as much as possible, bring as big of an olah or as many olas as one can because kol amar b'hareza meshubach, as we've learned before. However, ushlamim mu'atim, and here it's not saying a suggestion, this is actually a halacha. You're not allowed to bring more shlamim than you need, because again, you're not allowed to bring a carbon that you know you're not going to be able to finish in the 2 days you have to eat it, because everything that's left over is going to create noser. So therefore, if you don't have a lot of family, but you have a lot of money, spend more of your money on that will be completely burnt up and won't run into issues of leftovers. Zev is zev mu'ed. What if a person's broke and has a small family? Then al zeh nemar, this is what the Mishnah earlier, the Machlekes B'Shama Beis were saying, al zeh nemar ma'a kesef ushtei kesef, that it's $1 and $2, right? Meaning this very small shiur, because it's what it's basically saying is even you shouldn't spend less than that. But again, zev is merubim, if you have a big family, and you're blessed with Givaldika wealth, then the halach is al zeh nemar. This is what the pasuk says, and this is really the entire basis of this entire Mishnah. Ish kematnas yadoy kibrik kas Hashem alekecha shenas Allah. A person's supposed to spend whatever he can, whatever Hashem blessed him with, in order to be able to be mekayim these mitzvahs. Meaning, if you have enough money to buy many olas and many shlamim, certainly do that, as long as you have people who are going to eat it, and you're going to have enough money to be able to support by buying all those olas. If you're missing money, then buy more shlamim. If you're missing family, buy more olas. Ask the Gemara, are you telling me that if a person has not a lot of money but a big family, he should buy shlamim merubim? What does that mean, shlamim merubim? For the Gemara, very practical question. Me'echi ma'isi. What are you saying? We said 2 seconds ago you're broke. So what are we telling him? He's going to go buy a lot of shlamim? How are you going to afford all these shlamim? Animals are not cheap. Let's go to Austin, Texas, and see if you can buy a steer. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg. Ha Leslie, he doesn't have any money. Rav Chizda says tofel. And tofel is umevi pargadol. And here we're coming back to the discussion earlier. What's that? This is a Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. So Chizkiah says, remember, tofel means behema lebehema, meaning the first animal has to be entirely chulin. Second animal can be a mixture. Rabbi Yochanan said, no, every animal must have at least some chulin. They don't have to be entirely chulin, but it has to be at least some chulin. So what is Rav Chizda saying? Rav Chizda tofel umevi pargadol, bring one big animal. He clearly holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Right. Rabbi Yochanan, who says that every animal must contain some chulin, he says, how do you do tofel? Umevi pargadol. He doesn't say bring two, the first one chulin and the second one meiser sheni. He says one animal, mix it all up together. Chizkiah would argue with this. Chizkiah would say this does not work. You cannot have your primary chagiga have any meiser sheni in it. Right? Amarle Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says to Rav Chizda, and we'll see what Rav Sheshes holds in a moment. Hare Amru, Toflin Behema Lebehema. He seems to be asking as if he's speaking. He's puppeting Chizkiah's words. What would Chizkiah? Yeah, he said. Yeah. But no, he's arguing on Rav Chizda on behalf of Chizkiah's opinion, basically. Chizkiah's opinion, who says you must have your first animal be entirely chulin. How can you buy one big animal that has both chulin and meiser sheni? He says Hare Amru Toflin Behema Lebehema. And when he said that, the Gemara is confused as to what he really meant. Maika Amarle. What was Rav Sheshes saying to Rav Chizda? Meaning, was he just simply parroting Chizkiah's idea? Or was he saying a bigger chiddush? He's saying the following. Hare Amru Toflin Behema Lebehema. You're allowed to make two animals, the first one meiser and the second one, first one chulin, second one meiser. Avalomos lemos. But it's usher to have one animal that contains both. If that's what he's saying, which is how we read it, I think, when we read the Gemara, the lemale, let him say the more important part, which is ein toflin mos lemos. It's like he's missing the more important, ikar chaser min hasefer, right? Really what we're looking to tell you is you can't mix it all up in one shot. Not that you're supposed to split it up into two. It's a little bit missing. Ella hachi amarle, sorry. Rather, it must be what he means to say is hare amru af toflin behema lebehema. Meaning to say that Rav Shesh's opinion is going to be, have a wonderful day, that you do both. Meaning he's a bit traumatic. He says tofel, however you want. You want to bring a big animal, you can mix it up. You want to bring two animals, you can do that, and you can have the first one be chulin and the second one be meiser entirely. He says
that accepts the coolest of both.
Coolest of both, right? Now, Kiman Fred the Gemara, the loike Chizkiah, but the loike Rabbi Yochanan. Now, by the way, you might say, who cares that he's not like Chizkiah? Who cares that he's not like Rabbi Yochanan? Gvaldika Amoraim, but Lamaisa Abirayim, right? They're Talmidim of Rav Sheshes and Rav Chizda. They can maybe not argue completely, but Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiah, they're generationally on that same madrega. They're allowed to argue, and that's what the Gemara asks. Maybe you'll say it's only Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan who argue, but perhaps Masnaisa, the Braisas, lo pligi. Let's remember, what did we do yesterday on Amud Aleph? Sorry, on Amud Aleph, we brought a Braisa to support Chizkiah and a Braisa to support Rabbi Yochanan, right? And those Braisas seem to each be saying like one of them and not like the other. It seems. So let's just speak it out. The first Braisa really said Ma'urav, you can be Ma'arav. That brisa clearly is only like Rabbi Yochanan, because the Chizkiah would disagree with that. The second brisa was from the fact that Beis Hillel says the first day, the first meal has to be chulin.
And we use that for support.
And we have supported Chizkiah with that by saying that the first animal, it sounds like, must be entirely chulin, which sounds not like Rabbi Yochanan. So it seems on the surface that those two brises are a stira in brises. So whatever the machlokes Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, you'll say it's a machlokes tanaim. That's what the Gemara says. V'chitema, it's only a machlokes amirayim. I got two brises. It's a machlokes tanaim, and therefore you can't come up with a third shita that doesn't exist at all. Have a great day. That doesn't have a basis at all in brisa. Gemara says v'hakatani achila rishona min achulin. It says achila rishona min achulin, which implies only from chulin, and therefore you don't have a third shita. Gemara says no. I'll explain to you that there is a third shita, meaning what Rav Sheshes can say. I'll argue with Chizkiah's interpretation of that brisa. Chizkiah will read that brisa to mean the first carbon must be entirely chulin, the first achila. I'll say that no, even that first carbon can have some meiser sheni. And my achila rishona, what did Beis Hillel mean when he said the first achila? Did not mean the carbon. He meant shiur demei achila rishona min achulin, meaning when it's mixed with meiser sheni, you have to make sure that there's an amount in that first carbon that's enough to be yotze your chagiga, whatever it is, 2 maws, whatever the shiur is, according to Beis Hillel. But ein echanami, you can mix it up. And la'olam, he's found a way to manufacture a third opinion that would have a support in a brisa. Now, the first brisa clearly is only like Rabbi Yochanan. The second brisa could be like Chizkiah, could be like Rav Sheshes.
At the end of the day, we pass him like Rabbi Yochanan, so it doesn't really matter.
Doesn't really matter. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Continues the Gemara. Amar Ula, Amar Reish Lakish, Hifresh Eser Behemus Lichgigosai. A person is mafresh. He separates 10 animals, and like we said earlier, you can bring many chagigas. Let's say on the first day, you have 10 animals. Let's say he's got a big family, whatever it is. Hikriv Chamesh B'Yom Tov Rishon. Let's say he brings up the first on the Yom Tov Rishon, and now he's going to want to go and bring the 5 on the second day. Choser Umakriv Chamesh B'Yom Tov Sheni. He can do that. He's allowed to take the remaining 5 and do it on the second day. We'll see in a moment exactly what the scenario Rish Lakish was talking about. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no. Kivan Shepasak. Once you stopped on the first day, Shuv Einay Makriv, and Rashi speaks out here because that's Baltosif. It's Baltosif to bring 5 additional ones. Now, this seems to be a machlokes, which seems to fly in the face of everything we've been learning up until now, especially the fact that Rabbi Yochanan himself is the one who was discussing tofel. Where is there a Baltosif here? Why is this Baltosif? So the Gemara explains.
Seems to be he was mafresh the 10.
Right, he's mafresh these 10. These are my chagigas, and he stopped on the first day.
If he hadn't been mafresh 10, but mafresh 5, Rabbi Yochanan wasn't saying he could be mafresh more. Yeah.
That could be a simple way, at least in the Havamina, how you would say. Right. The Maskana won't be a kasha. Amar of Abba v'loy pligi. Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan here are not really arguing. What they're saying is kan b'stam and kan b'mefarish. Meaning, when Rabbi Yochanan said that halacha is it's baltosif, it's talking about where you were stam. You didn't say anything. You just, and again, what I mean is you were mafresh 10. Stam here means that you didn't indicate your intent.
Which day?
You didn't indicate your intent. Mm-hmm. Since you didn't indicate your intent to bring them all on the first day, one can conclude from your actions that maybe you actually think there's a mitzvah to bring a chagiga on the first day and a mitzvah to bring a chagiga on the second day, which would be baltosif. Whereas when Reish Lakish said that it's mutter to bring the 5 on the second day, that's talking about where on the first day you indicated you plan on bringing all 10 on the first day, and for whatever reason you weren't able to finish, so now your 5 on the second day is just a tashlumin of the first day. But that's not baltosif. You're only doing it to fulfill your requirement that you said yesterday you have of bringing all 10. Hi, stam hechidami, the Gemara is bothered. But one second, this idea, the Rabbi Yochanan says it's going to be usher because of baltosif is going to be a problem because you weren't mefarish that all 10 you wanted to bring up on the first day. You left it vague. If the reason why you didn't bring it on the first day was because there was no time left in the day, then the fact that you didn't explain that your chiyuv is all 10, who cares? No one's going to assume that's baltosif because the reason why you couldn't finish is because you couldn't finish. It's like it's insane to think that because a person doesn't have time to bring all 10 karbanos because he's got a big family, that's going to be called baltosif because you couldn't do it fast enough. Especially considering the fact that most of the avodah is on the kohen to go fast, not on you. Maybe you'll say that no, he had plenty of time. It's just that he didn't have anyone to eat it, so therefore he thought he was going to bring 10. He was mafresh 10. Turns out after the 6th one, he realizes, he miscalculated how much meat he's going to need. So now the last 5, he realizes I don't need to bring these up anymore. So you know what? Tomorrow I'll bring them up as an adava or something like that. right? Or I'll bring them up tomorrow. And everyone's going to know the reason why you split it into 2 days is high delay akrivinu is the less lay ochlan. Meaning, again, remember, you can eat a shlama for 2 days. So by splitting it into the second day, you gain an entire new day of eating, for at least for those second 5 korbanos. The Gemara says, so therefore, what's the scenario under which, by not explaining your intent to be makriv all 10 animals on the first day, what is the understanding where that's going to be called Baal Tosef? You'll always have an explanation for why you did what you did. Where it says, Lo tzricha, the ika shehus b'yom, ve'isle ochlan. No, there is time. Simple answer. Ve'isle ochlan, you have plenty of people to eat, meaning there's really no reason for you to have stopped bringing up the korbanos. And you specifically stopped with time left in the day, even though you needed more meat to give people to eat. And midibakama lo yakrivinu, and from the fact that you were not makriv the remaining 5, shma mina shiure shayrinu, it must be that you're specifically leaving it over on purpose for the second day, because you mistakenly believe the second day there's a separate chiyuv. That's a problem of Baal Tosef, and Reish Lakish would agree to that. The hachanami mistabra, the chiyasa Ravan and Rabbi Yochanan, when Ravan came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said, Hifrish eser behemois l'chigasai, this basic halacha, if you have 10 animals separated and designated for your carbon chagiga, hikriv chamesh b'yom tov rishon, chozer u'makriv chamesh b'yom tov sheni. Kashin adadi, it's a kasha on the original statement of Rabbi Yochanan, where the halacha is that you're not allowed to, and it's Baal Tosef. Elalav shmamina, kan b'stam, when he said it's Baal Tosef, it's when you didn't clarify it, meaning you didn't clarify it, and therefore, since there's time left in the day and there's plenty of people to eat, the only explanation for your behavior is that Baal Tosef. The kan, when is it mutter, is when you're mefarish, or even if you're not mefarish, but there's no time left in the day, or you have plenty of people, you don't have anyone else left to eat it. So shma mina, that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish aren't arguing, and really, originally the question is not a kasha. Tofel is only going to be talking about where you have time left in the day, there's people that you need to eat, and so therefore the halacha is Tofel would work. When you don't have that, it's going to be usher. Itmar nami, and here Rashi explains the Itmar nami isn't a raya to the entire statement of Rabbi Yochanan over here. It's the heicha de muchach milsa. That Rabbi Yochanan will always be moded that it's not Baal Tosef if we can interpret the behavior on day 1 that you don't mean that if we can interpret that what you're doing is not to celebrate a second day of Yontif, of Chagiga, then it's going to be mutter. What's the raya from there? Itmar nami Rav Shemen bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. Let me just jump here. Lo shanu, meaning lo shanu, the brisa that said, that we're going to say later on, that you can bring many chagigas, right? Brisa says, it says, look, oso atachogig below yoser. There's a limit on how many chagigas you're allowed to bring, the brisa says later on. That brisa says, lo shanu ela shelo gamar. That's only talking about where you didn't finish. We'll explain what that means in a second. Aval gamar, if you did finish, then chozer u'makriv. So my gamar, what does it mean gamar? Elam a gamar karbanos, if you finished all the karbanos you said you were going to bring, that makes no sense. What do you mean? My makriv, what are we telling me? You can't bring any more karbanos, you already finished bringing them. So what does it mean, gamar? Ela shelo gamar hayom, it means there's time left in the day. So when there's time left in the day, that's when it's usher. Because why? Because why are you doing that? If not for the thought that maybe tomorrow I have a separate chiyuv and you want to hold them over for tomorrow. Ela, aval gamar, but if the day finished, gamar hayom, then chozer u'makriv, because you have an excuse why you didn't bring it on the first day because there's no time left, and therefore that's not called Baal Tosef. All right, we'll hold here. Shkoyach.
Are we taking sides